Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the second event that we are hosting as part of our new VentureFizz product management offering, which I'm so excited about. Last month, we hosted Paul English and had an amazing discussion. We launched this community, which has been going fantastic. We have over 100 members. It's invite only. So if you are a product manager in the Boston area, any level of experience from senior VP, CPO, down to individual contributors, you need to go to venturefizz.com/communities to request an invite so we can loop you in. There's been a lot of engaging conversations. There's going to be more events that are exclusive to the community. There's a lot of job opportunities that have been really amazing because there's been some intros that have been made already. And people are connecting, a lot of direct messaging to each other. So I'm super excited about the momentum we have there. But part of the offering that I wanted to connect with this whole new product management community is events that are targeted to the greater VentureFizz audience. So today we have Matt Kaplan with us. Matt, say hello.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Keith.
So Matt is one of the top product leaders in the Boston tech scene. I mean, so you've heard names like Toast, Acquia, LogMeIn. These are all companies that have scaled. You think about Toast, they scaled to $1 billion plus in revenue. They're a juggernaut in the Boston tech scene, publicly traded, incredibly successful company. You go out to eat, you see Toast, right? It's one of these brands that it's just synonymous with success. And Matt was there during that true growth session. The company was already at a stage that he's going to talk about, but he helped grow it to the next level and plateau. And he's done this multiple times with companies that have multiple products under their umbrella. So it's not just a single product strategy. There's a lot going on. So we already have our next event planned, which is going to be July 16th with Gillian Hawks. She's the Chief Product Officer with Optimal Dynamics. Before that, she led product at Six River Systems, which is a robotics company that was acquired by Shopify. So that's going to be a great event. So stay tuned to register for that. Okay, for this event, we're going to try something a little bit new. I want to use the chat feature. Before we've used the Q&A, which we can still use. If you have a question during the event, you can put that in the Q&A feature. But instead, we're going to use the chat. So if you have questions as we're talking, you could chime in. If you want to engage with people that are attending, like, hey, wow, I did that for my product, or I tried this, just so that there's a little side conversation going on. I think that will be really interesting. So we're going to experiment with that. If it fails, I will learn my lesson, but hopefully it's an engaging conversation. So I want to start off just, asking people like, what are you looking to learn out of this event? So we've got great topics planned, but I want to get from the community like, hey, as you're here, what's the one thing that you're trying to learn from this? So I'm going to type in something to learn how product managers can grow their careers to an executive level. All right. So I just added it in. So I want to see how product managers can grow their careers to an executive level. So as you're thinking about things, add them to the chat. I'll be monitoring them. All right. So let's get into our programming here because we want to talk to Matt and leverage his time effectively. And we are recording this. So that's something that we'll be sending it out after the event. But Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us here.
It's great to be here, Keith. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, so I covered your background a little bit, but I don't know if you want to give like maybe just a little bit of an overview, a little bit more context to the things you've done in your career.
Yeah, sure. Early in my career, I did a lot of startups, a lot of failed startups along the way. Series A, Series B companies, seed stage companies. But I really didn't discover my, I guess, true calling until much later in life. I was called a late bloomer, I guess. And I, became an executive, a product executive at LogMeIn really in 2012. And so between there and Acquia and Toast, I've really been focused more at the chief product officer or head of product role. And that's sort of where I've been focused now. And now I'm doing some fractional work, actually. I'm helping companies, actually back to my roots, Series A, Series B companies, helping them build a team, improve their product practices, and help them avoid some of the pitfalls that I had along the way.
All right, so as you've been building these different companies throughout your career, one of the key elements of when you've joined, especially when we talked about Toast and LogMeIn and Acquia, you had the opportunity to work with some amazing founders. But I think one of the challenging things is you got to, help take a vision of a product and implement it and help that vision scale.
Yeah. So, I have had a chance to work with some awesome founders, and like, where would we be without founders? I'm not a founder. Many of the folks on the call probably haven't been founders of a SaaS company or a B2B SaaS company of any scale for that matter. So the founders that I work with have scaled companies to hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion of revenue. Mike Simon at LogMeIn, Dries Buttart at Acquia, Steve Fredette and Monterang at Toast. Amazing founders, and that's what they do super well. I just saw a stat the other day that 0.2% of companies, the venture funded companies, actually ever get to $100 million in ARR. So let alone $1 billion. So these companies, both LogMeIn and Toast are $1 billion revenue companies, and the founders are, what makes them tick. Some of the things that like I admire about founders are like they have the courage to pursue their vision, and there's an important problem in the world that they want to address, and they do it, and they're sort of a little crazy in that way, and sort of their consistent or persistent pursuit of that problem. You heard from Paul English like last time about what he did, and somebody had said to me recently, a venture capitalist said he likes to work with founders who are a little crazy, but not delusional, not completely off the wall. So, some of the sort of characteristics of founders, that I work with are they're so I call whole brained. They actually operate with their entire brain. They have the left brain is the analytics brain, and then the right brain is the emotional brain, and they context switch between both of these sides of the brain, and so which makes it really challenging because as a product leader, you have to figure out like which side of the brain are you actually talking to at any one particular time. But these founders are amazing at operating, at really high levels, like 30,000 feet, and all the way down to like 3 feet or 3 inches, as well. And so like that's the beauty of them, and that's not what we do though. Like we're sort of I guess focus on that messy middle between 30,000 feet and 3 feet.
Well, so what's the role of like a product leader when you're working with founders, especially, as you're scaling?
Yeah. So as I said, like our job is to operate in that messy middle. That's the area that founders sometimes have blind spots on. So they need people like us. They need product leaders to turn that vision into a reality. I use kind of the movie analogy. It's like they got the initial script funded. Let's say for a TV series, they sold the script, they wrote the script, they actually they directed it, and they got the first sort of episode out, maybe a couple episodes out, but now they need the team in place to finish the season and to actually get enough audience that we can write another season and so on. So they need people like us, product leaders, to actually help them visualize or turn that initial vision into that story that actually has lots of legs and opportunities. So we help them craft a strategy. That's our job, is to turn that sort of ultimate vision into a sequence of events. How are we going to have this unfold? We need to hire and build a team, a leadership team. Like product, as and many of you know, it's a team sport, and so it's not any one particular player. We got to draft all the players and help them with a strategy of putting that team on the field and winning and creating winning culture as well. And we need to build a sort of system, the practices that help them scale the organization. That's kind of what they rely on us to do. And we have to bring sort of, I would say, like just the right amount of discipline, not too much, so that it kind of affects their perception of speed, but just enough so that we can continue to grow and scale. So that's how I've kind of worked with some of these founders.
Now, like, but what advice would you have, right? So there's all types of founders. I mean, you've worked with some amazing founders. But like what advice would you have? Because, sometimes, this is their baby, this is their company, this is the product, it's scaling. You're coming in as a leader to help scale that vision. So
Yeah.
what advice would you have on working with those founders?
So often founders are product folks in and of themselves, right? They have the
Mhm.
vision for the product.
Right.
And so one of the things that I figured out along the way was we need to give the founders a way of expressing their opinions about the product as early as possible. Mike Simon used to say, bring me wet paint. Don't bring me a finished product or finished good. Like if you brought a PowerPoint presentation that was fully baked and beautifully designed, it would feel like as if they couldn't influence it, as he couldn't influence it. And so I'd say bring them in early to the process with things that are far enough along that like you can imagine how it'd be implemented, but not too far along so that it's like it's too much of a finished product. That's one thing. The second thing I would say is use customer feedback to back your opinions. There's nothing like voice of customer to add credibility to your statements. And that's what they love. They're very customer centric founders, and they want to know how customers feel about your idea or their idea. As you mentioned before, it's like this left brain, right brain thing. You've got to know at any particular time what side of the brain you're talking to. So I the funny story about a founder who would say, well, why don't you do some research and bring me back some research? That's sort of the analytical side. And then so we do some research and we bring it back, and then he'd say at the other time, he'd say, well, don't you just know? Like, don't you have intuition about this? So like, so you have to pick and choose when you do your research and when you use intuition as well. So kind of that's an important aspect of it. The other thing is, like, I would say, don't try to be like the founder. You've got to augment them. So look for their weaknesses, look for the things that you can do to complement them. And often their greatest strength is also their weakness. One such weakness is oftentimes is context switching, right? Like it's amazing they can do it so well, but it's also drives the sort of the product and engineering team nuts if they're constantly switching priorities. So kind of know what that weakness is and address it. And I would just say one thing is you need a parking lot. So founders have a million ideas, and they want to know that when they give you an idea that you're going to either pursue it or you're going to have it on a list. And so Matthew Mamet actually was somebody I work with, a product leader, and he had a strategy of writing it down on a ticket, any idea that came in from the CEO, and he put it on the board. This is when we were in the office. Like he'd put it on the board, and the CEO would come in, and the next day and say, we have another idea. He's like, okay, is this more important or less important than the last idea? And he put it on the board. And so he'd do this over and over again. And over time, the sticky note would lose its stickiness and fall on the floor. And the CEO like never actually remember that it was there in the first place. So you need a strategy, especially in this virtual world, a hybrid world, of putting the CEO ideas into a parking lot.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the Paul English conversation where, I mean, he's an idea guy. He's constantly thinking of ideas, and one of his ideas at Kayak was to basically build Uber before Uber. It was a button where you would get a black car, and he was talking to Boston Coach at the time, but luckily, or who knows what that could have been, but he's like, I think we paved the right path of creating what Kayak became in terms of market value versus trying to steer in this other direction where sometimes it can be distracting. So,
Totally.
so, okay, navigating uncertainty, right? Markets change. I mean, I think about Toast. You're building this hyper growth company, and all of a sudden, a pandemic with software that supports restaurants that no longer have customers. So, how do you think about navigating uncertainty as a product leader?
Yeah, I just wrote a post about this, and I've had some time to think about this topic of the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, about, how do we become better product leaders? So what are the things that like won't show up in a job spec, right? But like, so the one thing that came to mind was this idea that we are living in a constant state of uncertainty as a product leader. And it really is our job. I state in the sort of in the blog post, it's our job to navigate this ambiguity, this uncertainty. It's a critical role that we have. But because we're living in this world of uncertainty, and that's actually our happy place, right? We think about it's all endless possibilities exist because we're in this world of uncertainty. But the other parts of the organization, like the functional parts, the sales, the marketing, customer success, finance, they all actually want certainty. They crave certainty. And so here we are, thinking about the world in which we live and the world in which they live and this tension that exists. So like, the thing about the uncertainty in our world. Are we working on the most important problems? Well, we think so, but we don't really know. What will it take to get to product market fit? I don't know. I mean, we're trying lots of things, What are we shipping next? Well, we hope we have a good idea on that, but it could change. Is it going to be good enough? Like, are we doing a good job? Well, you have to figure that out. Will customers use it? Maybe, maybe not. That's another thing. And then, where's our competition coming from? Those are all like questions that we're constantly being asked. And when you think about like all of the feedback that we get from our peers in these companies, like the chief technology officers, like, what's the criteria for prioritizing your initiatives? Has anyone ever heard that one? What's the roadmap? What's the committed roadmap that we can launch? Can have a marketable moment around from the chief marketing officer. Curious if folks have heard that one. What is the ROI for your product investments? The CFOs constantly want to know. So these are like the questions of certainty that we can't really answer with intellectual honesty. And so it's as if we're like living in these like two different planets, the world of product and everyone else.
Well, so you just went through a whole bunch of like, the C-level suite, the CTO's head of engineering is, trying to prioritize initiatives. You've got the CMO thinking about go to market. You've got the chief revenue officer that's like, when can I start selling? Like, so like, how does all this affect the product leader? Because it just seems like you've got everyone asking you for different things.
Well, totally. I mean, this puts a lot of pressure on the product leader to try to answer these questions as best as possible. And oftentimes, we feel like we're making it up sometimes. And because we all know that there's no right or wrong answers, no exact answer for many of these questions. And it kind of challenges our intellectual honesty, if as product folks. It starts to introduce doubt about ourselves, about our career choices, about our team. And it could lead to imposter syndrome in some folks. It's like, I haven't been, at this level at a company for this long. Am I the right leader for this company at this stage? And so, my biggest piece of advice is like, don't let it affect you that way, because it's not healthy.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, that when Matt and I met to do a pre-event conversation, and I, I love Matt's style because he's like, I want to provide information, but I want to provide actual things that you can do, right? So there's learning and doing. So like, how do you like, what can people do to help like any level of experience, whether if you're a leader or you're a director or you're a senior PM or PM, you're probably getting lots of people from different directions. So what can you actually do to address this?
Yeah, great question. So, well, first, let me share some of the mistakes I made in doing this before. And by the way, to your point, Keith, this is like, you don't need to be the head of product to do any of these things. To your point, I think even in navigating uncertainty in your team, right, is an important aspect of being a product manager or senior product manager, right? Every day, the Scrum team is going to come to you and say, well, what are we working on? What that navigating ambiguity and uncertainty at that level is super important, and it cascades all the way up to the head of product and in a large company. So you're absolutely right. But first, some mistakes I've made is like, the first is like, I got defensive. It's like, well, don't they know how hard our job is? Like, how dare they ask us the question? Don't they know this is ambiguous, that we can't actually answer, when is something going to shift? Or aren't we just iterating until we find like product market fit? And that's not, getting defensive is actually a bad strategy. Like, it's bad because it makes it makes them feel like you just don't want to answer the question. And so that's one strategy. Like, don't do that. You can get defensive internally, but like, don't actually show your defensiveness. The second mistake I made was actually inviting full transparency. So like, hey, come on to our world, like, look at the mess. And like, that was also not a great strategy, because it's like, it's when you see the messiness of our world. A shout out to John Cutler and the beautiful mess that he talks about. But like, it is super messy, and people who aren't comfortable in uncertainty or ambiguous situations find that really overwhelming. And so that's the second mistake I made. The third mistake I made was giving into like the need for more information. So what we do as product leaders, right? There's two sort of uh, superpowers we have. One is sort of being able to make decisions without a lot of data. Right, that's one superpower. The second superpower is our ability to actually alter or change our mind when new data is presenting itself. So acting on that new data. So the other mistake I made was like giving into rounds and rounds of research. Well, we have to get more data. We have to get more data. Well, actually, more data sometimes won't give you clarity, won't actually answer the question. And so I made that mistake too, sort of giving in to the need for more and more information. So that's the mistake. Those are the mistakes I made. So what I think we need to do about it, and I outlined this in the blog post. It was published on Tidemark's platform. But number one is like getting closer to customers and their problems. That's like number one. It's like if you can use the voice of customer to back your decision process, that is awesome. Everyone loves that. The second is shifting the focus towards things that won't change, like product strategy, things that are more durable in nature. It's going to be, the strategy is going to be there for 18 to 24 months. So let's focus on that and iterate toward that, but have that be sort of the certainty thing, the strategy piece, and not the roadmap itself. Enlist your peers. So instead of enlisting them in sort of the showing you the messiness, enlist them in the ways that you're going to de-risk the strategy, the experiments you're going to run, the hypotheses that you have. Bring them into that discussion. That's another thing. And then there's two more. Make your progress visible. So show that there's progress happening. Andrew Burton, who hired me at LogMeIn, talked about when you drive by the construction site, you want to hear the sound of hammering. Like that's like you want to hear the progress that's being made. That's really hard to do in software. But I think you can do that. You can have weekly events that showcase the what's happening in product. So show to the organization that you're making progress, and it's visible. And then the last piece is like just don't invent everything. There's so much uncertainty in just solving our customers' needs and their problems. Don't try to invent a new framework for discovering, a framework for prioritization. Use things that are already well known in that event. So yeah, check it out. And I'd love to hear the feedback from folks on LinkedIn or in the community.
Yeah, I just shared a link to the article that Matt's been referencing, so definitely check that out. It's a good read. What Mike had a good comment. So he's like, the switching of priorities is an interesting one. When to push back or embrace a change in direction from leadership. So, like, if you don't agree with the founders or whoever from the leadership team, like, how do you push back? Like, what's a gentle way that's not confrontational or become problematic?
Yeah. So some strategies I've used here are um, do it in a way that doesn't get you fired. Number one. No.
Good.
What well, a strategy that I've used is in some cases is actually do some of the legwork ahead of time to validate your idea and your assumption. So if you try to get funding for an idea that they don't necessarily agree with, it's going to be really hard to do. If you can do it quietly and say, hey, actually look at the progress we've made on this thing, that actually shows that not only did you have an idea and you pursued, but you pursued it. I think on the pushing back, the biggest thing is the context switching, right? And so I think you have to share with the founders what the cost of that context switching is, like back and forth, and also set a goal for, hey, we're gonna stick to this strategy for a quarter or two, and set some clear goals. And if it's not working within that, like buy yourself some time. But if it's not working, okay, then we'll try a different approach. But you got to like have enough time to actually pursue something and get meaningful feedback.
All right, so I mentioned this earlier. You've been part of companies that have built multi-product strategy, which is really, I mean, it's hard to build one product that exceeds, market conditions and scales and grows. So building a multi-product strategy is a whole nother ballgame. So what's your approach to that point of view of building, multiple
Yeah.
products under one company umbrella?
Yeah. So the way I think about strategy, ultimately, it's about choice. It's about making choices such that you close sort of some of the pathways, right? And doing that is probably the hardest thing for a founder to agree with because preserving optionality is what they love. It's like, why give up? A founder, particularly a first-time founder, has this sort of they've caught lightning in a bottle, and it's like, why not, think of this as the opportunity of a lifetime. And so getting them to have to choose a strategy is super hard. And so you got to help them. And so the first approach is sort of like write it down, write down the product strategy, commit it to paper. It will serve as a blueprint for the organization. Like that's number one. Every organization I've been in the last decade or so, it's like, first thing is like, in addition to getting the engine going of product and engineering effectively, is what is the bigger picture? What's the strategy? And write it down. I'd also keep it to not too long because 3 to 5 years is like, it's really hard to do, and especially at early stage company. But 18 to 24 months is perfectly reasonable to think about a time horizon for the strategy. And then like the third thing I do is I approach it using frameworks. Frameworks that were introduced to me, like Blue Ocean Strategy is a framework, Jobs to be Done is a good framework, Playing to Win is an awesome framework for writing it down. Profit from the Core is like it's about how do you leverage the core of what you've done. SWOT is obviously a certain type of framework, but on this topic, be careful not to get too academic because I've done that as well. Like I got to be known as the person who like read the book over the weekend and then like came out with a new framework, for us to try. And it's like, a lot of folks were like, I couldn't follow me, and it was just too much. So be careful of being too overly academic, but just enough where it's like, you invested some time, you learned a system, you're not reinventing the wheel, and you're bringing that to the company. So those are that's the ways I approach it.
How did you decide which framework was appropriate based on the stage of the company or the type of product? Like how do you decide
Yeah,
which framework?
I think it all depends on the maturity of the company and what you're trying to accomplish. Like Blue Ocean Strategy is like the framework for finding uncontested markets. The blue oceans are the good oceans versus the red oceans are full of sharks and competitors. And so you're trying to find like an uncontested market space. There's an example in the book about Callaway Golf, how they came up with the Big Bertha, is that the club with the
Driver.
giant head, the driver with the giant head, because they were trying to actually attract non-golfers into the market because hitting a golf ball is hard and I stink at it. So like they actually created the Big Bertha for non-golfers, but it turned out actually the golfers loved it too. And so they were able to. So those are the kinds of things that, like, if you're thinking about non-consumers, customers who don't use a product or don't, that was one opportunity. Same thing with a wine. They give an example of a wine company. I think it was Barefoot, or one of the one with the kangaroo. What's that bottle? Anyone know that? The bottle with the kangaroo on the front of it.
Uh,
Anyway,
Escaping me right now.
they found out that picking wine was really difficult for novices, so people who didn't know wine, and so it was intimidating. And so they decided to create a label that actually was much more appropriate for first time wine drinkers, and they brought in a whole set. So anyway, that's a great one. Profit from the Core is like more for mature, like late stage companies. I've got this core business. How do we continue to Yellowtail? Thank you, Brian. Hey, Brian. Yellowtail. So yeah, bringing that's another sort of thing. Profiting from the core is like, how do you leverage the core of what you have so you don't run away from it, and so that the net new product that you add on is actually an additive and doesn't subtract from the core. Anyway, different ways to think about it.
Okay, well, what are the elements of a good product strategy? Like I think about Toast, right? not only do you have software, you have hardware. Like you go to a restaurant and they are holding that tablet and they're doing everything on Toast hardware. LogMeIn, different, right? Where you have like remote access products, but then there was like the Join Me that went viral and that had that, product led growth fit, so it was just like all these different types of products that may not be the same core,
Yeah.
same industry, right? Or like just it's different.
Yeah, it is very different, but I would say the elements of strategy are similar across many different companies. I happen to think of strategy, it's about choices, but when you bring a strategy to life, it has to be a compelling narrative. I really focus on kind of the narrative of the strategy because it's got to be told and retold to your employees, to your customers, to your investors, partners, and so on. So, like any good story, it starts with a problem in the world and identifies the hero and the villain, of that problem. So, always start the strategy with like, what is that problem that you're trying to address? Who is it for? And that's sort of like the opening, and then it needs to have a clear vision of the future. Think of again like the hero's journey, kind of we all learned about that framework in storytelling in high school or middle school, I forget where, but like that hero's journey, the of you have to have a vision of what the end looks like, and I call that like planting the flag on top of the mountaintop, and I've used this visual for the past, I don't know, 15 years, 12 to 15 years of that visual of planting the flag. That's where we're going as a team. That's the company. And actually CEO, the founders I've worked with have taken that and they can associate with like, this is going to be a climb to a top of a mountain. It's going to be a really hard trek. And you've got to get everyone to support you. So the story of how we're going to do that, how are we going to climb this mountain is the sequence, is this like strategic sequence that your strategy it talks about to get you there. That could be wrong. We might have to take different pathways along the way, i.e., iterate along the way, but ultimately that is the destination. And so I think that's super important to have clear as like the strategic sequence, how we expect to get there, even in the sort of fogginess at the top of the mountain or in the middle of the mountain that may be due to uncertainty. And I think the last thing is the strategy needs to answer very specifically how our product is going to be different. How are we going to differentiate it? What are we going to do that nobody else has done? What makes us special, makes us unique? So to me, those are the aspects.
Well, you talk about, the storytelling aspect, which that's actually a hard thing. Like for like, I think a lot of founders actually, like when they're pitching VCs, like their story isn't there, right? Like they might have all of these charts of what their growth is going to look like, but they're not necessarily talking about the market, but as it relates to a product leader, right? Like how do you become that chief storyteller that captivates the whole company to pursue this mission?
Yeah, so this is like I do think the product leader's job is to be that chief storyteller. Not so much from taking the limelight away from the CEO, but helping the CEO develop that narrative. Strategy, again, the strategy, as I mentioned, needs to be memorable. If you ask a handful of folks in your company, 10 people in your company, what is the strategy? And it's not they don't all say the same thing, then there isn't a clear kind of vision for that. And so there are frameworks again for this as well. Like I've talked a lot about this with folks on my team. There's a framework that Pixar used to create their stories, actual movies, and it was written down in a book called Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar. Their sort of motto was story is king and trust the process, the creative process. And you think about like any creative process. So, if you've written music or if you've written books or even blog posts or what have you, it gets really dark, like, and you're like in a tunnel and you don't know if you're actually going to get to the other side. That's what it feels like sometimes in trying to like create strategy or narrative for a company. You just got to continue to pursue it as well. So use a framework like that to help. Look, good storytelling, one aspect of it is like it appeals to the emotions. It's not just about the functional jobs to be done, it's about the emotional jobs to be done. How is your product affect your customers emotionally? That's something that's super important part of the strategy. And then one thing I like to say is like look for opportunities to embed the strategy in every conversation and every meeting, sprint, even sprint planning, quarterly planning, all hands, kickoff events with sales folks, prior to say, like, you've got to actually continue to say it over and over again. And don't be too concerned about being bored or boring your audience. If you're stating the same, strategy over and over, that's what's going to make it stick. So you just got to keep reinforcing it as well.
So marketing owns the outward facing storytelling, right? So this is more inward, but like, would you partner up with marketing to help craft that inward message?
Yeah, certainly it's a partnership as well. But the thing that when you think about the product strategy, it has to answer the question. The product has to deliver on the promise that you're setting in the market. And if it doesn't do that, you got this sort of cognitive dissonance. The marketing team said, like, the product's going to do this, our brand actually is setting like it's going to be this awesome thing and we're going to delight our customers and do what they love and help them thrive and all this stuff. But ultimately, if the product doesn't deliver on that, then you have a problem. So for me, you can certainly partner with marketing internally, but you have to be like really as the head of product, you've got to hold your team accountable, and also to be honest about, does this product deliver on the promise that we're stating, on our brand promise and on our marketing promise?
Okay, so one of the things that you've been successful at is building products that have scaled in vertical SaaS. And even though there's a big draw towards AI fund, companies that are doing AI are getting funded, vertical SaaS is still something that a lot of VCs are spending or investing, not spending, investing a lot of capital to pursue. So if anyone's not familiar with vertical SaaS, which I think most of the people that are part of this event are, like, what is it?
So, I mean, I think of very simply vertical SaaS as software as a service created for a single industry or single purpose. The largest vertical SaaS providers out there, Toast included, Toast focused on restaurants, a restaurant platform, point of sale for restaurants. That's how it started, but it's like the operating system that runs the restaurant. There's like Procore is a vertical SaaS provider and for construction management. Service Titan is another really large one for field service management. But like nearly what I'm finding, it's interestingly enough, like nearly every industry has an emerging vertical SaaS provider. I'll give you some examples. Companies I know, Hiarc is vertical SaaS for home building, automating the process of home building. Axion Ray is issue management for manufacturing companies. Birdie is a company based in the UK that's doing vertical SaaS for home healthcare support. Herd is accounting for therapists, like niche, really small, but they aim to be like full products eventually. But they're starting with a niche. Aurora Solar is for solar installers, and I just met the other day the CEO of a company I never heard of called Skimmer, and it's for pool service professionals. So like think about like
Wow,
the
that's
narrowest
vertical.
of niches, yeah, of verticals. And I think it's fascinating actually. And actually, there are venture capital firms like Tidemark that are specializing in investments in vertical SaaS. So
Mhm.
I think it's here to stay, and it's an awesome model.
Yeah. So, I mean, like Gloss Genius is another one that started out in beauty that, I mean, they're killing it. I mean, you could go on and on and on for different examples, but so why do you think there's so much momentum in this market?
You know, First of all, as a product leader, I think vertical SaaS is like a dream come true for us, because it allows you to go really deep with one type of customer and understand their problems very intimately. you kind of see the natural adjacencies, right? That unfold. They're like they're full of opportunity. And then the challenge becomes really less about do we have an opportunity but it's about the choices about what to spend your time on. It's like an embarrassment of opportunities. So I think from a product leader, I would highly recommend product leaders seek out in their next gig, perhaps a vertical SaaS company, because it really opens your mind to what possibilities can be if you go really deep with a subset of your customers. But I think there's momentum because it provides lots of ways to monetize beyond just monthly SaaS fees. A Toast monetized payments, obviously loans, embedded finance, even hardware, right? So like think about like it introduces a different new business model, business opportunity. It allows you to build an ecosystem of partners, right? If you're really narrowly focused on a subset of an industry, you can build an ecosystem of partners that plug in, technology and service providers. Um, and also like another benefit is that you don't actually have to build all the capabilities yourself. They're now horizontal solutions that kind of can plug in to your vertical SaaS offering to give you that all-in-one suite. Solutions for payroll, accounting, payments, finance, scheduling. This allows you to like really just go deep on your core value proposition and the thing that sets you apart.
All right, well, let's shift gears here. So you've done a great job. Actually, like I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. Like you and I, when we met at Permission TV, so that was how many years ago? We're gonna date each other
Yeah,
here,
almost 18, maybe 18 years ago.
18 years ago. So yeah, we've known each
I
other
had
for a
I
long
had
time.
hair back then, yeah.
Well, so uh, why I'm weaving that into this part of the conversation is I've got to see your career develop, right? So you were doing all these startups, and then you became head of product, and then you became chief product officer at one of the latest publicly traded companies in the Boston tech scene, that being Toast. So you've done a good job. Is what I'm saying is like kudos to you for managing your career. So what advice would you have to others on working your way into more of that executive product leadership role?
Yeah, so let me share a little bit more about like what and mistakes I made along the way. And so like and kind of as I coach folks on my team as well, I kind of share this story. So as I mentioned before, like I was like a late bloomer in product. I started my career as a consultant and project manager for a company, Cambridge Technology Partners. But, I played the startup game for about the first 20 years of my career. And it took lots of roles like managing product development, uh, engineering, creative services, even marketing, which I would never do again. But I was very broad. I took this broad as possible because in a startup, you have to wear many hats and that they value that. But it was kind of aimless. Like I didn't have a direction. I didn't have a mentor. And so the problem with being broad, and if you're in a startup today, and if that's how you're starting a career, it's great. But the problem is by being broad is that companies eventually look at you and say, they try to slot you and they say, well, what are you? What executive, what CXO could you play? And I realized that like 20 years into my career, that's like, oh crap, like I didn't have one. I didn't have a major. I didn't declare. And so it was actually my wife that encouraged me to like settle down and sort of like kind of declare. And then you think about kids in sports, if you've coached your kids or helped them, even yourselves, like you start with multi-sports and you try all these different sports, and then you realize, actually, I'm really good at, lacrosse or baseball or basketball. And you declare, and then you try to get really good at it. And so I think it's super important to declare. And I realized I was always sort of like passionate about solving problems in the world and like telling stories, as I just mentioned, about a future, like creating that vision and getting people excited about it. I got Craig Daniel to join that Permission TV company by getting him excited about all the things that we were going to do. But I realized that product leadership was like the perfect pairing of those passions, the solving problems in the real world and telling stories. So that's how I sort of ended up in product as an executive. But the advice I give to folks, the biggest piece of advice is like treat your career as a product. I mean, you think about it, you're the CEO of your career. So write it down like a PRD, one pager. Like maybe it's like not a PRD, maybe it's like a CRD, your career requirements document. Like think about it that way. Like it's important to know like where you're going, what motivates you, what skills you need to obtain along the way. So if you think about it, start with the end in mind. What is your vision for the future? Are you a CPO? Are you a founder? Do you want to have flexibility in your life? Do you want to spend more time with the kids and family? I ask this question a lot in interviews. What is the pinnacle of your career? Tell me what that flag on top of the mountain looks like. And then create a sequence, a strategic sequence about how you're going to get there. What steps are you going to take along the way? And identify the gaps and like in what ways do you need to be stretched so that you can achieve that goal. And so look for initiatives and roles and that can stretch you. As I mentioned, like declare a major, like become great at some aspect of product management, whether it's the stage of the company, maybe it's 0 to 1, maybe it's an industry segment like SMB or enterprise. And also become known as an expert in an area. It's okay like to focus on a sub vertical. Just make sure there's a big enough TAM of companies that who would hire you. And then like those are the kinds of things that I think the major takeaway here is your career is like the most important product that you need to manage.
And then like, how do you know like it's time to make like a change? Like it's time, like, cause you may be like hitting the wall at a company. Like, how do you know when's that right time to make that change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like one of the suggestions, I asked this in an interview question recently. I was interviewing somebody. It's like imagine it's 1 year from now. What does your LinkedIn profile say that you accomplished in the past year? Right? It basically shows me like is the candidate thinking about their career as a product, their personal goals, their accomplishments, the impact that they're going to have at their company. So I think it's so to know whether or not you've moved on to move on. Like I think you have to do that exercise. Like write your story in the form of a LinkedIn profile update for next year, but also do it for 5 years from now. Right? Imagine that. Imagine you write your profile for what did you accomplish? What impact did you have? How did you gain the skills that you needed? Who were your mentors along the way? Then you think that with that vision in mind, now think about your current company. Are you able to do what you just imagined at your current company? Are you going to be stretched in the right way? Are you going to have the mentorship that you need? If so, great. You're on the path. Like stay the course, stick to it. Don't let the context switching, job hopping, get to you. But it's time to move on. And this is kind of how I felt in my career when your story, the story that you're telling about yourself, no longer matches the situation in your company, when you no longer feel like you're being stretched, when you're not getting the skills, the opportunities, the mentorship you need, when it becomes really hard to believe that like your story is going to come true. So that, to me, that's the thing. It's an exercise in like knowing exactly who you are and what you want, and then comparing that and contrasting that against your current situation.
Yeah, I love that LinkedIn exercise. That's definitely something that's a task that you can do. Like write what your LinkedIn profile should look like a year from now, or even if you're younger in your career, you want it to look like kind of further down the road. So uh like that's a great one. So that'll be like one of the snippets we're gonna carve out of this discussion that I'll definitely be sharing on LinkedIn. All right, so we've had some great questions here. So we had someone ask, like, kind of going back to, you know, working with founders. So how do you test during the interview process that founders match your values and preferred ways to work? And how much signal do you think you can get during the interview process, right? So oftentimes you join a company, you don't know what you don't know until you are there and So how do you test that out during the interview process? Like, do you do like a whiteboarding session together? Do you case studies? Like, what do you recommend?
Um, well, clearly, like understanding what the values are, like the real values. I mean, it could be written down or not, but I think you have to understand what the company stands for, what their values are. And you got to do some due diligence. I think it's hard to get that. It's going to hard to be engaged with a CEO in an interview process and with a whiteboarding session, because I don't know what whiteboarding sessions would be would give you that insight. So I think it's about doing your diligence with respect to others in the company. Look, the earlier you go, the harder it is to going to get that signal, right? The longer you go, the bigger the network, the more. So I think it's like tapping the folks that you do know that CEO is super important. Look at the history of the CEO, obviously Glassdoor, and those are they're not really that. I don't find them to be that telling because it doesn't actually always reflect the reality of it. But yeah, I remember I remember a conversation. This was with Mike Simon when he interviewed me, and he asked me, he's like, "Which of your products was your favorite?" And I was like thinking, "Oh, geez, I hate this question." And so I came back and I said, "Well, it's kind of like your kids. You can't really pick a favorite." And immediately, without flinching, he said, "Well, I have a favorite, don't you?" And so, a favorite kid. It's like, and so I knew like it was going to be fun to work with. Like he injected humor in the conversation. I sort of took took a chance, and I eventually answered the question. But I, like, can you interact with the founder in a way that shows demonstrates a little bit more of their personality, and humor was something that to this day, Mike was he's such a funny guy to work with.
I'm gonna jump in a little bit of context here. So I 1,000% agree. Like Glassdoor, use that as just a point of reference. Do not hold that company truth. The only time someone's gonna leave a review on Glassdoor unsolicited is if they're mad. So it's going to be a negative review. And then the company's like, oh no, we got a negative review. Everyone's going to be mad and not going to want to work here. So they'll have to have other people put reviews if they love the work there. So take everything on Glassdoor with a grain of salt. But what Matt said, uh, if you're joining a company, especially in an executive leadership role, they're going to ask you for references, but they're doing their own backdoor references, most likely about what you're like to work with and how you performed and how did you handle difficult situations. So it's not the references that you hand over. It's oftentimes the backdoor references that they're going to really discover that this is going to be a great hire. You can do the same thing as you're joining a company, find past employees that worked with that individual, just like, hey, I'm thinking about, reach out on LinkedIn, thinking of joining this company, would love to learn, more about your experience working there. So that's another level of due diligence that if you're going in as an executive, you can certainly do that, or even less experience. So it's kind of up to you as far as how deep you want to go in terms of your own due diligence. Um, Someone asked early on one of their um, this is kind of going off the path of careers, but scaling a team from less than 5 to 20 plus, like you've done that, right? You've grown product teams that are large at Toast and LogMeIn. So what's the advice you have on scaling a product team?
Yeah, so I think getting the mechanics of the team working effectively early on is super important. So our and I don't mean like the rituals. Like a lot of teams tend to gravitate towards like the first thing is they roll out Agile, Scrum, and like, okay, let's get all the rituals. Like, but rituals are one thing, but like actually, believing in Agile principles, the second. So I think it's principles focused. And look, your system is going to break at every stage of growth. Like when you're a 5-person team and a 20-person team, it's 100% it's going to break. So I would say as you scale, try to like continue to preserve the what makes a team successful, and the culture that you have to do that, not just the ceremonies, but the culture. Um, We actually at Toast we rolled out a triad model, which is so we had basically 150 teams, all operating like independently, and we rolled out a triad model of product design and engineering to kind of mirror what a small startup team looked like, right? So make sure that you had a holistic group of folks working on the same customer problem. I like to say waking up thinking about the same customer, the same problem. So to scale an organization, like what inevitably happens is product managers are pulled into multiple squads, and you end up with this fractured view, and you have no accountability. So to the extent that you can actually mirror a squad with the right leadership in place, the focus on a single customer problem, waking up thinking in the morning about that problem, the better. And again, that's not always possible, but as you grow and as you scale, remember like, okay, what is the unit of scale? And that's team. It has got to be team. It's got to be squad. So despite like how your product gets matures and grows, and you want to like sometimes engineering team wants leaders want to reorganize around the team around technical capabilities, and that's kind of really hard to do because you're not all thinking about the same customer, same problem. So to me, it's about getting that unit, the operating unit, done well, and the culture for that, and then repeating that pattern.
So another question that someone had earlier was, regardless of level of experience, like when are you deciding to hire a product manager that has specific domain experience or somebody that's just really good at as a product manager? Like, so there's that kind
Yeah,
of,
it's a great question. Oh, hi, Stephen. I think you asked that question.
he did. Yes, Stephen.
How are you? Um, so yeah, so I think certainly like domain knowledge is super important in things like fintech. Like, you need a lot of deep domain expertise. So that's one area, or hardware, right? You're going to need expertise in certain hardware. But a lot of, I think, sort of the core foundations of a product manager, doing being empathetic to customers, really obsessing about the problem, being able to make decisions with limited data. All of those sort of core foundational product capabilities, manager capabilities, are applicable across any product. So I think you have to decide early on, like, is this a role that requires domain knowledge or not? And I say for the most part, like a lot of these vertical SaaS companies, like there's a lot of pattern matching that goes on. Like I can see from the experience at Toast how it could be applied to home building. Like, and so like again, different industry, you got to learn the industry, but you understand sort of the complexity of that. That's another thing too. Try to find product managers that have dealt with a level of complexity in your product offering, versus somebody that's maybe worked on a consumer or e-commerce site. That's not necessarily the same level of complexity as something like a Toast. So yeah, so matching that, but isn't it a simple answer? I think you just have to determine if domain expertise is needed for that particular function.
We're pretty much at time here. Unfortunately, I can't answer every question, but there was some great ones. I like this chat feature. Like, I feel like I've never like done this. I've done so many webinars, but I was always like, I don't know, it's gonna like distract me. It did a little bit, but I found it to be it flowed into the conversation. So everyone that was participating, writing in the chat, that's
You
something I'm
trusted
gonna do
me.
again.
You trusted me, Keith. You took
I
a
trusted
on
you
the
and
on a
it
chat.
worked great. So, here's my LinkedIn. If we're not connected already, please shoot me a LinkedIn connection. And then here, if you are not a member of our product management community, the requirements are you're a product manager in Boston. We're hyper local. We're very specific in terms of what we're looking for here. So, um, the Matt, thank you so much for taking the time for sharing all your words of wisdom and all the great advice. I mean, the storytelling is so important, the future direction of your career, how to work with founders. We covered a ton in 1 hour. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Keith. It was great. Appreciate it.